So I left the MTC, went to the Salt Lake City airport, and got to see my family there. This is back when you could still go all the way to the gate in the airport and say goodbye to people there. I gave hugs. I was like, time is short. I'll see you guys soon. In just a couple years. On the plane ride down to Chile, we were on a really big plane, and I was sitting next to this guy, and he was fun to talk to, really interested in why we were going to be missionaries for 2 years. He said he was part of the Gideons, like a Gideonite, and I was like, what's that? And he's like, you know those Bibles that you always see when you go to a hotel? He's like, that's us. We put those in there. And I was like, oh, that's cool, man. When the plane landed, I got out. I remember the smell. There was a smell of moisture and industry in the air. Some missionaries picked us up, brought us to the mission office, and then dropped us off at a hotel to stay the night before we went to our areas. Not the nicest hotel. The whole floor shared a bathroom. I went in there to brush my teeth. I was thirsty, so I took a sip of water from the sink. And one of the assistants to the president came and he's like, dude, what are you doing? Don't drink the water. You're going to get worms. And I was like, uh-oh, but I never got worms. Next morning, I took a bus all the way to my area. It was the furthest south town in our mission, a small town. The climate there is very much like California, where I am now. It's the same Pacific coast, and it's the same distance from the equator, just south of the equator, and I'm north of the equator. You got the beach, coast, and then you have like in the central area. So this town, if I was going to compare it to a town in California, it would be like Vacaville or Lodi, something like that, out there, little town. Being on the other side of the hemisphere, I was going into winter, even though I just got out of spring in Utah. And winters there rain like crazy. And the rain is fierce, and it goes sideways, and it just blasts you. I remember knocking on doors during one of these crazy rainstorms, and we had like rain jackets and boots on, but it didn't matter. Our boots were full of water, and it was cold and windy, and we were knocking on doors, and we thought people would have sympathy, like, oh, they're out in the cold trying to do the Lord's work. We'll let them in and listen to their message. But instead, everyone was like, what are you doing? Don't you know enough to get out of the rain? Get out of here. But yeah, when I first got there, went to this house we were staying at. We were one of the last missions where missionaries would stay with a family. The church kind of phased that out. But in Latin America, they call it like pension, and you have pensionistas. So like there's a mamita or a lady that cooks your meals and stuff. But we were staying with this family, and the dad was the bishop of the ward. Mom was a super nice lady. They're all nice. They had 2 young daughters, and they kind of saw us like older brothers. Super cute kids. A funny story that I like to tell from when I first got there. The bishop that we were staying with didn't speak much English, but he knew it was my first day, so he was being nice and trying to help me out, speaking some English. And I was like, donde está el baño? So I went and used the bathroom. And to set up this story, like in the States, we say Scotch tape. Even though that's a brand, there's all kinds of clear tape. So in Chile, they have toilet paper, and the brand is confort, like comfort. And everyone just calls toilet paper comfort. But I didn't know that. It was my first day there, and I'm in the bathroom, and the bishop knocks on the door, and he's like, Elder House, do you need some comfort? I was like, no, estoy bien, I'm okay. They had a shower there. Missionaries are supposed to be able to have a hot shower every day, but the mission didn't pay them a ton of money to have us there. So they limited our showers to every other day. We'd get 5 minutes. If we went over 5 minutes, they'd shut the power off, and we'd have no light or heat because the shower was like warmed by this little plugged in unit. If you wanted it to be warm at all, you had to put it down to like a trickle and then just kind of splash it on yourself. And everyone wore sandals in the shower because lots of worms would come up and just hang out on the sides and stuff. There'd be a lot of worms in there. But my first missionary companion was my trainer, and he was a super great dude. Nice, humble, wanted to do the right thing. He was pretty naive. He spent his whole life growing up in California. And when I was like, it's not that bad here, man. We have dirt roads in my hometown in Michigan. But he was like, man, if Michigan is like Chile, I never want to go there. And he's like, oh, and they eat soup. What is soup? Who eats soup? And I was like, dude, I love soup. I was like, people know soup. He took me around to meet members of the ward. Lots of nice people there. As I said, the first day, this one family was laughing because I couldn't speak Spanish at all. We'd knock on doors all day and give lessons. There's all kinds of goals that the mission gives you, like need to talk to so many people a day, need to teach so many lessons a week, goals for baptizing people into the church, just lots of goals that we're trying to reach every day. And being a full-time missionary is a 24/7, 2-year thing. It's all day, every day. Very intense. When we'd teach people, I'd basically just read from the discussions that we had because I couldn't really have a conversation in Spanish yet. But we were teaching a handful of different youth there in the area that got baptized into the church. I was still having a hard time waking up in the morning. The alarm would go off at 7 and it was cold. And we would start companionship study. We'd read from the mission handbook and other materials. He and I would take turns reading parts, and I would stay under the covers to stay warm, like read in bed, and then sometimes I'd be kind of dozing off. He really didn't like that. It was upsetting to him. So one day he's like, at their house, we need to have companionship inventory. And it's, I guess, where you get together and talk about your grievances or something. He did it in the nicest way possible, but he's like, I feel like we'd be more faithful servants if you stayed awake in the morning and got up for study and didn't stay in bed. I was like, dude, I'm tired. I was like, you stay up like an hour past our bedtime writing in your journal, and it keeps me up and I lose an hour of sleep. He's like, the handbook says that you need to get up at 7. And I was like, the handbook says you need to be asleep by 11. So if you follow the handbook at night, then I'll follow it in the morning because I want to get my 8 hours. And he's like, that's different. Sacrificing sleep for the Lord is a good thing. And I was like, no, dude. He was always late getting ready to get out the door, and I was always ready. And then he'd be like, hurry up, elder. We need to get there faster. And I was like, dude, why didn't we just leave on time so we can just walk instead of run everywhere? Being a missionary is just a pretty intense experience. Being away from home and teaching people about the church, I started thinking about the teaching that we're going to go back to live with our Heavenly Father after we die. And we teach that all the time. And I was just thinking about it, and I was like, do I want to go live with Heavenly Father? I asked my companion, I was like, do you want to live with Heavenly Father? And he's like, of course. And I was like, I don't know, I was just thinking like, I don't really know Heavenly Father. I pray to him, like I talk to him, but he doesn't talk back. And I was like, I know my real father, my mother and father, my brothers and sisters, and I definitely want to be able to be with them in the next life, but I don't really feel strongly about living with Heavenly Father in the next life. And he was like, what are you talking about? Don't make me question stuff like that. While I was in this first area, 9/11 happened back in New York, and that was pretty crazy. I was in a foreign country, could barely speak the language. We were walking, we went to pick up our laundry. A lady in the church did our laundry once a week, and we went to pick it up. And she showed us the TV. She's like, you see what's going on in your country? Like, they blew up some buildings. And my companion was a little bit shocked, but kind of in denial. He's like, no, that's nothing. That's just like a demolition or something. And I was like, no way, dude. That's World War III. Someone attacked our country. Holy flip. So we went home, and the family was like, hey, the mission called. They said, you guys need to stay indoors because your country is under attack. And we just sat there the next day or two watching the news, watching the clips over and over, the planes hitting the buildings. After a few days, we were able to go back out and work again, but it wasn't long before somebody attacked the US Embassy in Chile, and then we had to go like a week or two without wearing our name tags, which was ridiculous because I stood out like a sore thumb, like I was the only blonde white guy in a suit walking around. It was obvious that I was a gringo Mormon walking around. One of the young men in the ward lent me an acoustic guitar to play, which was a super lifesaver for me mentally. When we'd go home for lunch, I would have a little bit of time to play guitar, and I even taught my companion some basics. We decided to write a song once. So there's a lot of people that are drunk in public there, a lot of people without work, and they would just kind of drink their day away. And they'd approach us and they'd be like, "Hola, hermano," and they'd check our hand and they'd pull us real close because they didn't have any boundaries or personal space bubble. Just breathe their box wine breath in your face, and they wouldn't let go of your hand. And my companion really disliked them, like holding on to his hand all the time and not letting go. So he's like, "Dude, next time it happens, let's both grab one of his hands and just like go around him in circles to confuse him." So one night on our way back home, we did that. Some dude was going on forever about how he used to be a firefighter. And he was just like, "Hermano, hermano." And then, so we did that. I did it for him. He thought it was funny. But when we were writing a song, we wrote a song about that, which was funny. Just 19-year-old kids that have to be serious all the time, talking about salvation and life after death and how to live a good life. So we needed times where we could kind of let loose a little bit. Once a week we had preparation day, P-Day. In my mission, we didn't prep for anything. I was always told growing up, you got to learn how to cook and clean, do the laundry, go shopping, and stuff like that for your mission when you're living on your own. And I had all that stuff down, but didn't need to use any of it because we lived with a pensionista who took care of that stuff for us. But P-Days, we had to take a bus 45 minutes to the stake center and meet with our district of missionaries, about 12 or 16 of us. We'd go there dressed up in suits and ties, have a long, boring meeting. I don't know why people that like to hear themselves talk were already teaching all the time and in meetings, but more meetings. That's also when we would get our mail, because the district leader would go to the mission office, grab everyone's mail, bring it back once a week. So I'd get to read letters, and that was also the time we were supposed to write letters. After the meeting, they would usually go play baby football or soccer on a small court at the church buildings. I instantly noticed that there was like segregation, even companionships where there was like a Latino companion and a North American companion. When they got to church, they would separate Latinos and North Americans. And that felt super wrong to me. Even though it made sense, like they could speak English and not have to speak Spanish and stuff and kind of be more like back at home. But the whites seemed pretty elitist to me. The Latinos were a lot more down to earth, less fakey. And so I would hang out with them. On P-Days, we'd have to go get a lunch, and the mission only gave us $15 a month to live off of, and part of that we had to give to the laundry lady in the ward, which was like $5, and then we needed money for bus fare, so I really only had like 25 cents a day to spend, and that was like 100 Chilean pesos, and so I'd keep a 100 peso coin in my pocket, and I would spend that once a day. Even though we were fed at the pension, evenings we'd be walking for hours without food, and so I might stop at a little place and grab a little candy for one of those coins. A couple times I got so hungry. One time somebody gave me an orange, and I ate the orange, and then I ate the peel too because I was hungry. Did the same thing with a banana once. Kind of bitter. But yeah, on P-Days, I'd go like with the Latino missionaries and we'd go find like a bread shop to buy a roll or something. And we went in the shop and these guys were stealing stuff. And I was like, guys, what are you doing? We're missionaries. Don't steal. And they're like, of course we steal. We're Latinos. I was like, no, come on. And while I was there one P-Day, the Latinos were like, you guys, the new mission president is racist. And I was like, what? What happened? So, for my first few weeks there was one mission president, and he was a nice, humble guy. He lived in a really normal little apartment, and the mission had typical vans for transportation that you would have in Chile. But then the new mission president came in that I would have for the whole rest of the time, and he came from a very prominent, wealthy family in the church, and he was like, this will not do. So he moved out of the apartment into this fancy gated penthouse with carpet. Nobody has carpet down in Chile, but there was imported carpet there, which when I went with the missionaries, I remember the Latinos were like looking at the carpet, feeling it, and they're like, cuicos, which was like slang for like rich people or preppies or something. I don't think they thought that was a good use of tithing money that they were giving to the church. Speaking of tithing, the area authority came to the state conference talking to, like, state conference is several wards together, right? And so there's a lot of members of the church there. And this guy was talking and he's like, you guys need to pay tithing more. Chilenos aren't paying enough tithing. We want to build another temple here, but we can't unless more people are paying tithing. And he told a story about how he went to Africa and these kids were passing the sacrament without shoes. And he said, hey, Bishop, why don't we use some of the church funds to give them some shoes? And the bishop said, I tried to, but they wouldn't accept shoes because they wanted their money to go to the poor people in South America. So he was kind of shaming these Chileans, like the poor Africans without shoes are paying their tithes and offerings, and you guys have shoes and you're not. At the same meeting, my mission president gave a talk, and he talked about how his family was like super rich, and the reason why they were all so rich was because they followed God's commandments and they were obedient and faithful. And he's talking to a whole bunch of poor Chilenos that are trying to live good lives, and I didn't think it was very nice. But the reason why the missionaries were saying he was racist was because when he first got there, he took all the Latinos out of leadership positions. There's like district leaders, zone leaders, people that work in the office, assistants to the president, trainers, and he just flat out traded them all for North American English-speaking missionaries. And the Latinos were like, dude, he's racist. And I was like, that's not cool.